So this tutorial is a little bit more detailed and technical than a typical presentation. But that's because I think it's important that directors of development as well as database managers are all in agreement in advance of how you're going to manage your auction gift entry. This will ensure good reporting and also IRS acknowledgement compliance.
The greatest differentiating factor between auction gift entry and other event entry is the varying degree of deductibility, the sheer number of revenue streams and appeals, and potentially the use of a third-party vendor, which can compound the possible sources of payment. But not to worry, we shan't be stymied. Let's take a closer look at auction gift entry best practices. So you're completely familiar with the fully deductible contribution, which comprises the bulk of donations. And you're most likely familiar with the partially deductible contribution. This is a common occurrence with event fundraising, where the attendee receives some benefit, such as a meal, in exchange for a ticket price. So the donor's tax-deductible amount is the ticket fee minus the value received. So a $75 event ticket, for which a $25 meal is exchanged, will result in a $50 deductible gift. In both of these scenarios, the donor is making a cash donation, so the organization is required to acknowledge this donation both by the cash amount received and the date it was received. However, when the contribution is an in-kind donation of goods, such as an auction item, or services, like event catering, the organization does not assign a cash value to the contribution. Rather, it provides a detailed description of what was received. It's on the donor to determine the market value and thus the deductible amount. But what about an auction purchase? Well, these are actually similar to a ticket purchase, where some good was received in exchange for the contribution. But the problem is, unlike the value of a meal, the value of the auction goods exchanged varies from item to item. So technically speaking, meaning per the IRS, the organization needs to provide a good faith estimate of the value of every auction item sold over $75. So you can download this presentation, including links to the IRS requirements for charitable organizations. And of course, as always, consult your tax advisor. But I have pulled out the bottom line IRS requirements for your organization and listed them here. I've also included some sample language from other tax acknowledgements just to illustrate ways you can fulfill the IRS obligations when acknowledging different types of gifts to your donors. Okay, I'd like to talk about gift entry fields in the context of tax acknowledgement. If a donor purchases an auction item, it's very likely that he or she will also have a different type of auction-related contribution, typically a ticket purchase. It's possible, too, that each gift will have a different deductibility rule. So I recommend planning from the start to acknowledge auction gifts using not your typical gift acknowledgement process, but rather using a gift table that displays 5 critical fields for each contribution. The date, the amount of cash contribution, which will be a 0 for an in-kind contribution, the non-deductible amount, which will be the value of a meal for a ticket or the good faith estimate or fair market value of an auction item, the description field, which does double duty as the in-kind description or the purchased item description, depending on which type of gift is entered, and the purpose, which is your appeal name written in, King's English to help donors decipher what's really going on here. Most donor management software products ship with a gift table merge function. The potential problem is wrangling the donor contribution data from various payment sources. The check cash entry and even the online donation process that comes directly through your forms should be easy. But if you're working with an auction management software product, you will need to integrate both their acknowledgement process, if they have one, and their donor and donation import process into your post-event gift acknowledgement procedures. And of course, keep in mind pledges when sending auction acknowledgements, as you'll want to exclude any pledged gifts from the tax acknowledgement process. So let's take a look at the various types of auction-related revenues that are often referred to as appeals, or approaches, Or if you're using Salesforce, you might be using campaigns. But basically, whatever terminology you and your software product use, this reflects the effort that generated the revenue. So auction appeal hierarchies can get complicated. So when naming appeals, consider if you wish to include the gift appeal in the tax acknowledgement table as listed above, and also consider how you'll be reporting on these. For example, I like to know the percent of tickets sold through the organization's website versus through the auction vendor. I like to know the revenues raised from the live auction versus the silent auction. And depending on the day of fundraising strategy, you might want to track how much was raised as a straight donation at the event versus from donors who sent a donation in lieu of attending. This level of reporting would be a function of the appeal and the sub-appeal fields. So be thoughtful of that as you're setting up your appeal hierarchy. Be thinking forward to how you'll be wanting to report on your revenue. We've discussed 3 of the 5 critical data points for acknowledgement and reporting, and now I'd like to touch on the last 2. In-kind service value for internal use. Now, even though the organization does not report market value for in-kind donations for deductibility purposes, it can be very useful to assign a value internally. You may want to use this value when segmenting for major donors or tracking contribution value of in-kind donors over time. It also allows you to include a courtesy phrase such as, were it not for your donation, we would have had to extend X numbers of dollars to procure these services. And finally, depending on the fundraising strategy that you're using, you may be employing various funds. Some organizations have a pass the hat straight donation campaign during the event in which funds are raised for a specific project. If so, create an indicator for the gift entry process and acknowledgement language during the auction, right? Because if somebody makes a donation for a restricted program at the event, we need a way of capturing that information and passing it on at gift entry so that we can acknowledge that in our acknowledgement language for the donor.
Okay, so this presentation was a little wonky, but I hope it answered more questions than it raised. This presentation is available at the link as a PDF download, and we've also included links to the IRS publications that we talked about.